very difficult to understand why it is that the modern, civilized, progressive, rethinking world could stand in support of a death cult such as Hamas, rewarding Hamas for the October 7 atrocities with their own state. Things got so bad, so explicit, so unambiguous in the support of these liberal governments of the death cult, which is Hamas, that they actually derailed any ceasefire negotiations with Israel, that the positions of these liberal governments in favor of Hamas actually gave Hamas all the leverage that they needed to walk away from the table. Listen to what United States Secretary of State had to say about this.
You notice that the talks with Hamas fell apart on the day Macron made the unilateral decision that he's going to recognize a Palestinian state. And then you have other people come forward, other countries say, well, if there's not a ceasefire by September, we're going to recognize a Palestinian state. Well, if I'm Hamas, I basically conclude, let's not do a ceasefire. Right. Because we can be rewarded and we can claim it as a victory. So those messages, while largely symbolic in their minds, actually have made it harder to get peace and harder to achieve a deal with Hamas. They feel emboldened.
The question is why? Why would intelligent, rational, modern thinkers take such a radical position? What is the connection between progressives, liberals, and anti-Israel, pro-Hamas? Listen to this magnificent, eloquent articulation by British journalist Melanie Phillips as she lays it out very, very clearly.
A Western liberal tells him or herself, I'm a good person because I'm liberal, I'm liberal because I'm a good person, which means that I believe in things like the brotherhood of man, conscience and compassion, looking after the wretched of the world, the poor and the wretched of the world, standing up against abuses of power. These are all good things, and that's why I'm a liberal. And I'm a liberal because of all these good things. So, one of the expressions of my goodness and my liberalism is that I support the Palestinian Arabs who I think are an oppressed people, and they are oppressed by the Israelis who have taken their land away from them and they are oppressing them. Now, every part of that, in my view, is a lie. But put that to one side. This is what the liberal progressive thinks. And the liberal progressive thinks that supporting the Palestinians is therefore something that makes the liberal progressive a good person. October 7 happened, and suddenly you have a situation in which the people that the liberal progressive has supported as being oppressed, and everything they do is a legitimate defense or resistance against oppression, suddenly we can see that those people have turned into the most bloodthirsty savages that could ever be imagined, in which the people that they have supported as being oppressed are good people because they're victims, are these savages. And the people they have represented as oppressors are the victims. They can't have that. Because if they have that, if they admit that that is the case, then their entire worldview is shattered, because the people, you know, the cause they have supported is shown to be evil. And what does that make them? It makes them evil. So they can't have it. So what do? They go to extraordinary lengths to pretend that black is white, that justice is injustice, that oppression is resistance, and vice versa. So they have to represent the Israelis as being at fault. The Israelis are to blame for what's happened. So there is no better way of blaming people than accusing them of the very thing they are the victim of.
Projection.
So you accuse them of genocide. We hear it also regularly. The Israelis are accused of being Nazis. It's the same thing. It's not simply an offensive thing. It's a very deliberate thing, because if the Israelis are Nazis, then we are free. We, the liberal West, are free of any kind of guilt or any kind of association with bad things, because They are to blame. They are the people who are bad. And so we are free to continue with our fantasies of us being good people. And I think that's also what lay behind these amazing scenes that we saw on social media of people with their hands tearing down
The posters.
the hostages. Now you have to ask yourself, what's going through the mind of someone like that? These weren't posters advertising Israel. They weren't advertising the Israeli Defense Forces. They were pictures of babies, of children, of women who had been kidnapped by bloodthirsty monsters, by savage, depraved savages, and were being almost certainly subjected to untold horrors. And yet they were torn down, and the faces of the people tearing them down were contorted very often with rage and hate. And you have to ask yourself, what's going on in the mind of that person? And it seemed to me that they had to literally with their fingernails tear it out of sight. It was something that could not be tolerated to be in existence at all. The very concept of the Israeli babies and children as victims of the people they had been supporting, because it contradicted the narrative on which they had hung their own moral worth. And it seemed to me also they were tearing the Jews out, trying to tear the Jewish people completely out of their world, out of their sight, out of their world, out of their minds, out of their thoughts, and out of their consciences. That's to me what it represented. And this whole inversion of genocide thing is part of that. It is not just disgusting, it is not just ridiculous, it's evil. And I think it is a symptom of the evil paths into which the West has fallen through its embrace of a whole range of ideologies, a whole range of thinking, which I think has come to define what we call the liberal progressive West.
I truly believe that the liberal West has very good intentions. They actually want to have peace and harmony and coexistence. What they're missing is a moral compass. They're trying to use human rationalization in order to support their views, when in fact what they need to be using is an absolute value, an absolute and unchangeable, unconditional definition of good that does not change based upon whether you like the people or the class or the ethnicity or not. I'm talking about the absolute values that were laid down by the master of the universe in the blueprint of this world in the Bible. The master of the universe tells us, thou shalt not kill. More specifically, it says, thou shalt not murder. You are allowed to kill for self-defense, but you're not allowed to murder. That's the original Hebrew meaning of that commandment. You're not allowed to murder no matter what, because every single person was created in the image of God, no matter what their class, no matter what their tax bracket, no matter their color, their creed, their belief system. Every single person has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These are absolute values. The problem comes about when you project human rational explanations on morality and justice whilst excluding the absolute values. Case in point would be Robin Hood. Robin Hood, who stole from the rich in order to give to the poor. Now, we can argue until we're blue in the face about whether he did right or wrong, whether Robin Hood was a villain or if he was a social justice warrior. And in most cases, you should probably come to the conclusion that he was a terrorist, because nothing justifies stealing from the rich in order to give to the poor, even if your intentions are good. That action cannot be rationalized. When we go back to the absolute values of the blueprint of the world of the Bible, we realize thou shalt not steal. You're not allowed to repossess the possessions of someone else just because they have more than you, or because you're jealous, or because you're envious. That too is another moral value of the Ten Commandments, which says you're not allowed to be envious of someone else's possessions. And if we could only choose to seek justice, peace, and liberal values for all through an absolute value, then we wouldn't need to contort or distort our positions in order to fit our narratives. If we could only do that, to open our hearts to the values of the Bible, to be able to recognize that there's one master to this universe, that every single human being has the right to exist, and every human being has the right to live in peace, and that every human being should be pursuing their own organic connection with the master of the universe, we wouldn't need to look into the grass, into greener pastures, into our neighbors, and we all, in fact, would be able to live in peace and in true brotherhood.